let's make this a nice short intro. XCC rants and raves about my gameplay. So let's have a look at the game. Now before we start, I'm going to put a chart up on the screen that shows you the relative detectability of all the DDs in the game. It's a little bit out of date. It's a little white mouse chart that she's done one of her posts in the past. But it's still pretty much on point. Now, what I want you to look at is look for the Nooster Shimmy that's in the far row on the left. It's at position 10. It's got a detectability rate of 5.56. If they're all upgraded as best they can be. The Fletcher that's at position 19 in the far row on the left, he's got 5.8 concealment. Now, the third ship I want you to look at is the Tashkent on the far right, which is at 72, position 72. One of the worst concealments in the game at 7.39 kilometres. So bear that in mind as we start the game. As we start the game, you can see Mr Gibbins' footage will be in the top left and my footage will be on the main part of the screen. I've muted mine down low so you can hear what Mr Gibbins is thinking as the game progresses. If you've looked at either of the links I provided below for strategies for Russian DDs, it was written by the top North American player rated in Russian DDs going back a few years, you'll get an idea of the general strategy that I'm going to use in this game. On the screen right now you can see a graphic that gives you the overall strategy. I'm going to skirt the cap, providing close support to my fellow DD, the Fletcher, who's got far better concealment than me. That means I play to my strengths and he plays to his. Initially, looking at the map as it is right now, it's looking quite good. There's two DDs on either side. There's a Kitakazi and a German DD, basically playing the same role I will be on this side, on the far right cap. And on the near cap where we have a Fletcher who's got better concealment than me, who's going to be heading towards the cap. And I can support him, so it's looking quite good.
No, not at all. It's on it. No. It wasn't yesterday, you see, it was the day before. Ryan Sirius, how you doing? Motley, how you doing? Lunsman, how you doing? Wenger, how are you? It's the day before, it wasn't yesterday, was it?
Good luck. And fair seas.
Well, if you start playing again, Motley, use my code. There you are. There's my invite link. If you're in the EU, use my re-invite link. It's been a while since you played. You might get some free stuff.
How's it looking right now? Well, pretty good. We've got two BBs following us over to Cap A. Mr Gibbins is in the Johan de Witt. He's proceeding towards the cap, hopefully close support. Fletcher's heading straight towards the cap, and I'm heading wide, carrying out my game plan.
Do ships make you unhappy? Absolutely, yes, yeah, and it's exponential. The more ships you have, unhappiness increases at an exponential rate. Yes.
On a side note, let me know down below in the comments at which point in the video you think Mr Gibbons' facial expression most closely resembles a smacked bum. Sorry, I apologise, a smacked Gibbons bum.
Yep. Yes. It does. No wonder you hate the Navy. Well, you should be in the... well, I don't know. The Swiss Navy or something, then. I'll be very happy.
Keep an eye on the minimap as the Fletcher approaches the cap. Keep an eye on my concealment, which is 7.4, and there's the jagged line surrounding my DD. Watch as I go as close as possible without giving away my position. So I'm supporting my DD as close as possible. Keep an eye on the positions of the John Bart, the Pommern, and where Mr Gibbons places himself. Options for Mr Gibbons' placement of his ship include entering the cap behind the Fletcher, using his smoke for cover, turning on hydro, using the RPF that he's got to locate the nearest ships, sending his torpedoes across to the ships if they decide to smoke up, and using his guns to obliterate them out of the cap. Option 2 includes using his great concealment and his 40mm icebreaker to sit just outside the cap, angled in towards where he knows the ships are due to his RPF, and provide cover fire on the DDs if they're spotted. using hydro to protect against any incoming torpedoes. His third option is to hug the islands as close as you possibly can, while making sure that your guns are unable to fire upon the DDs in the cap that you know are there due to the RPF on your ship, but it enables you to use your gimmicky planes. This would of course be a very typical situation where the DDs receive zero support and the cruisers are able to farm damage from behind islands with no risk to themselves. Let's see which option he chooses. I for one have faith in you, Mr Gibbins. I know you'll do the right thing. Fletcher has entered the cap. The cap's being contested. We know it's not the Friesland. He's in cap D. I'm currently in an optimal position to provide support to the DD in the cap. You can see Mr Gibbons' RPF indicates the location of the nearest ship, which is most likely a DD in the cap. It would appear that Mr Gibbons has unfortunately mistook the outline of the island as a close family friend, and is on his way to give them a hug and a kiss. This unfortunately means there won't be any supporting gunfire towards the DDs, any torpedoes, or any use of hydro, at least at this point. But at least planes are an option.
Go for it, Tashkent.
Odd comment to make. I wasn't sure what he wanted here. Maybe he thinks I'm going to YOLO into the cap. I'm not sure, but considering I don't know what DDs are about and there's an Alaska closing, that would be quite a crazy situation to take. I should also point out that I'm running a build with no smoke. I've currently got the hull upgrade, but I think that's about it at the moment. The last thing I want to do is go into a cap, face a smoked up DD who's got a radar behind him, which as any DD would tell you is a nightmare situation. Also take note, Mr Gibbons is about to fire on the back line. This unfortunately means he can't provide support to the DDs in the cap for the next 14 to 16 seconds. It may have been a better option to hold fire until you're in line of sight of the DDs, but I wouldn't dream of telling someone how to play their ship. I leave that to the experts.
Go on.
Let's take stock of the current situation. In the ACAP where we are, 2 DDs have now been revealed. You can see they're both in a division, so they're going to be supporting each other. The Fletcher has now smoked up as they've been revealed, and he opens fire on them. I straight away open fire on them as well to give him as much support as I can. Mr Gibbons unfortunately chose option 3 and then decided to fire on the back line instead of holding fire until he had a line of sight on the DDs in the cap. This unfortunately means that for the next 14 to 16 seconds, Mr Gibbons is unable to provide supporting fire, but at least he has planes. So make up your own minds on positioning at this point.
Nope, cheeky double fire.
Двигатель в форсированном режиме.
All vision in the cap has now been lost. Both sides are now smoked up. I'm still in an optimal position to provide supporting fire for the Fletcher if we get sight of the DDs. Mr Gibbons unfortunately has an island between him and the RPF located DDs. But he does manage to send some planes into the smoke. Maybe he'll get lucky. Who needs guns? It's at this point in the video that I'm going to introduce the peer-reviewed Gibbons meter. This meter ranges from a rating of Happy Camper all the way down to Flaming Gibbon.
Sorry for all the dinging. Little bit of micromanagement of me fiddly stick thing, whatever it's called. Back up, Fletcher.
At this point we now have a stalemate in the cap. RDD and the 2 division DDs are smoked up with no vision of each other. Mr Gibbons has now positioned himself slightly forwards on the island finally so that he can provide gun support to RDD. Now in this position something's got to change, and I'm going to fire torpedoes into the smoke. Now you might have noticed torpedoes are being fired at the Fletcher, and I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I think Mr Gibbons is too, as you heard him say. Fletcher, get back. It's a shame we don't have a cruiser nearby offering hydro support.
Concentrate fire. Alle Stationen, melde Position eines strategischen Ziels.
I am absolutely furious right now. I realise that the cruiser has totally effed the DDs over at this cap. I then seriously contemplate spam clicking D3 over and over on the map in a furious rage. My forehead starts wrinkling and dark clouds start circling around my head. I shout to the heavens, what are these pricks doing? But then I get a grip of reality and I realise only a complete numpty would do that. I'm sure that cruiser had a very valid reason for hugging that island. A very, very valid reason for firing at the back line and not saving his shots for the DDs in the cap. And I'm sure his hydro would have been absolutely useless to that Fletcher. And so I calmed down. Our Fletcher's gone down to torpedoes in the smoke. And we now have 2 DDs capping with an Alaska who's just within close range to give them support. I'm in a bind here. I'm committed to going forwards. I don't want to waste this opportunity just to see if I can pick up a DD as I'm coming round this island. Possibly get the island between me and the Alaska.
Radar, probably. Never overcommit like that Fletcher's just done. It's chosen the highest risk option available to it, and as a result it's dead. Yeah. It's chosen to try and enter the cap halfway in. One, there's definitely a radar on Alaska, there might be one on Neptune. You've also got some very dangerous DDs there to deal with on the way.
Let me just break down what happened there. I was spotted by the Nooshashimi as I came round the lip of the island. I was then hit by radar. I started turning to the right to put the island between me and the Alaska, so I wouldn't have as many people shooting at me while I continued to fire on the Nooshashimi. As I went to the right, a Neptune appeared. Now, he could be a radar Neptune, we don't know. One of the preemptive sets of torps that I fired earlier into the smoke then connects with the Fletcher. Doesn't kill him, but it must take him quite low. At this point, Mr Gibbins, in between criticising the Fletcher for dying and nonchalantly checking the scoreboard, has fired 1 salvo on the Nooshashimi. Then he's got a 15-second reload, at least, and then he fires a HE salvo on a turning broadside Alaska instead of the Nooshashimi. I don't know why, but that was the choice he made at that point. Believe me, it took me all my willpower not to start spamming that D3 location on the map, but I managed to get a grip.
Двигатель в штатном режиме.
Torpedoes, dead ahead. Torpedoes to port.
Команда противника получила преимущество.
At this point, things are getting worse. I've managed to kite away from the cruisers on the flank while returning fire, and I'm trying to decide what to do next. The problem I have is that there are now 2 DDs that have capped the cap in front of us, and they're staying in the immediate area. They both have a higher concealment than me, and they're supported by potentially 2 radar ships, one of which has a tremendous fire rate. While I'm heading up north, I'm thinking to myself, the best thing I can probably do is cut behind Mr Gibbins, come down the other side of the cap, see if I can keep those islands between me, try and get the Fletcher maybe, do some damage to the Nooshashimi, see if I can provide pressure that way. And that was my initial plan. Now, as I'm doing this, Mr Gibbins is coming under repeated fire from the smoked up DDs. I think possibly the Neptune as well, underneath the cap. Now, he's continuing to fire HE at this time on the broadside Alaska, and decides to switch to AP just as the Alaska's going behind the island. But he manages to catch him for a grand total of 3k damage. Fair warning, the Gibbons meter is rising.
Прямо по курсу.
Come on, keep spotting for us, will you, Tashkent? Otherwise we're fucked.
Torpedoes to port.
Really important. For number one job as a DD, spot stuff.
I think I would dispute that. With all the different types of DDs that you have in the game now, and that's not including all the different ways that you can spec them, and taking into account radar, subs, CVs, hydro, I just don't think you can pigeonhole every DD like that. I think nowadays the most important role for a DD is to stay alive. You can call most matches in the first 2 to 3 minutes. It used to be 5, it's now down to about 2 or 3. The longer the match goes on, the more useful the DD is. How many times have you had games virtually over after 3 minutes once all your DDs are dead because they try and contest the cap? Matches can theoretically last 20 minutes, but they won't last 20 minutes if you pressure your DDs into rushing out ahead of you trying to spot in range of radars with smoked up DDs when they're not set up to do that. The problem is we go into these games blind. We don't know what spec people are running, we don't know what their builds are, we just have to expect them to do the best they can with the way they're set up. If you look at the scoreboard, it's been 5 minutes and change. We've lost 5 ships, including 2 DDs. Both are highest concealment DDs. They've lost 2 ships. While I'm repositioning, Mr Gibbons decides now's the time to go YOLO 2 high concealment DDs, backed up by 2 cruisers. Bear in mind he's got, at best, a 15-second reload guns and some mighty overpowered gimmicky planes. Good luck with that.
Yeah, don't let the enemy do this, where they're able to shoot at us and we can't shoot back. Yeah, number one job as a DD, spotting. So if you're sailing around caps behind islands, it doesn't matter if you're in a Tashkent, a Cabo, whatever. It's no use to anybody.
Well, I'm afraid that is a ludicrous thing to say. Island play is an inherent part of this game. How in hell would high concealment DDs ever deal with low concealment DDs in situations where there are islands? You'd use the islands to close on them. It's common sense. How many times have you ambushed battleships, cruisers and destroyers around islands by leaping out on them, surprising them? That's just beyond stupid, let alone breaking line of sight. So that's a ludicrous thing to say. You know, in this situation, I'd love to know how he thinks that a 7.4 kilometre DD is going to spot, without using islands, 2 DDs with 5 something concealment and stay alive while they then choose to smoke up if I fire, which then means I lose sight of them and they can then free rain fire on me, or their cruisers can then choose to kill me while they're smoked up. On top of that, you've got radar thrown into the mix. It's an absolutely ludicrous statement to make, to be honest with you. What you might notice when looking at Mr Gibbons' screen is that he's running RPF. So he's got a high level captain on the ship, or at least a level 14 captain. Now, I didn't notice him pinging the map at any point in the game so far, indicating where those DDs are. You can clearly see that he's aware of that, and you can see that I'm not. Now, it would be quite handy to know where their location is. Something to think about. It's very easy to criticise other gamers' gameplay, but the problem is there isn't a single player in this game who, if their gameplay was analysed, wouldn't have mistakes shown up or things they could have done better.
So the last thing you should be doing is hiding in a DD. You need to be spotting. Get eyes on stuff. Your team can't win the match if they can't shoot the enemy.
At this point it starts to go wrong. The plan of going down the right hand side of the A cap, hits a bit of a snag. We've got an FGG coming towards us. He's got 6k hydro, and in a minute or so he's going to be able to spot me. So the DDs are going to see me coming down the right hand side of the gap. That's going to ruin my plan, and I'm really in a bit of a bind now. The 2 BBs behind us are starting to relocate as well. And Mr G, in his ever so useful Netherlands cruiser, is trying to YOLO those on the left hand side of the map. If it was just the DDs, I'd take a chance. I'd have a go at them. If it was just the cruisers, I'd probably have a go at them and all. But combined, no, it's ludicrous to try and do that. All you're going to do is YOLO in there, get taken out pretty quickly, and enable Mr G to have a free salvo on one of the ships that's currently targeting me.
Torpedoes to port.
I'm counting on that one hitting the island. If it doesn't, I'm going to take it. I was hoping that was going to hit the island.
Hull breach. We're taking on water.
We're in a situation here where we've got fucking DDs.
Problem solved, sir.
This Tashkent has just completely fucked me over.
If there's one thing that winds me up, it's people who repeatedly spam click the map. What a useless thing to do. No messages, nothing. Just repeatedly spamming their frustration and their anger. Absolutely useless. Now at this point, I get pulled in. I start to reply in chat. I stop focusing on my own gameplay and going around this corner and seeing what I can do in the centre of the map with 13 minutes to go. And instead, I'm focusing on someone who's spewing their anger in my direction. And I try to explain that it's unlikely that I would survive rushing those 4 ships. Now, Mr Gibbins knows that, but he wants to play the game and get some enjoyment for himself from his perspective. Fair enough. But I'm not here to be his target dummy. Maybe if he had pushed into the cap at the beginning a bit quicker and supported the Fletcher a bit better, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Maybe if he'd have went into the cap and used hydro, we wouldn't be in this situation. We won't know. The fact is, and Mr G is frustrated. Tough titties. Get over it. He doesn't respond in chat to say what's going on, why he's unhappy. He just continues to spam click the map like some ignorant fool. Stop drinking caffeine.
I moved out to help it, and it's just gone no.
No. You moved out from your hiding place. Once the Fletcher was dead, I'd proceeded down the flank of the map and been chased off by the Alaska, Neptune and Nustrashimi, who were firing on me as I went all the way up the map and behind you. At that point, you then decided to move out. Any requests for support? Any pings for the nearest DDs? No. Be honest with yourself.
I'm going to sail all the way across. I don't want to fight. I'm just going to fucking leave a cap. 3 ships are just going to fuck off. Seriously, what are these pricks?
I can't answer for the 2 BBs. I've given up trying to explain the actions of players in this game. What I can say is right now what I'm doing is trying to get my chat working, because I've got a mod on there that turns off the chat. But since you were spam clicking me, I thought I'd try and respond. And at this point, my gameplay has ended, because I'm fighting with the chat, trying to get it working. I'm typing and actually repeat the message twice because it doesn't appear on my screen. So that's what I'm currently doing, responding to you, instead of being in the centre of the map, trying to fight the enemy ships.
EU server. Unbelievable. Sino, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. 28 months is massive. Thank you. They've done nothing at this cap. Now they're going to sail off to the other side of the map to do nothing at another cap. Unbelievable.
Torpedoes, dead ahead. Torpedoes, direct front.
The team's suiciding, get some damage and move on. Is that the John Bars or what?
Двигатель в
No, that's the
форсированном режиме.
Tashkent. Fucking idiots.
Believe me, after the way you've behaved, the feeling's mutual. Grow up and stop being a spoiled brat. It's not all about you. What I didn't quite get across there, as you're very limited in how much you can type when you're in the middle of a game that you're trying to play, is that the game effectively spiralled down once we lost the Fletcher and we lost the Kitakazi on the other side. On the day, they had the better lineup of ships that supported each other, and they started in better positions and they grouped together better. It happens. Get over it. Put your toys back in the pram and move on. The rest of the game just consists of me kiting away from their ships. I end up number 1, do about 100, I can't remember, 110, 120,000 damage, something like that. So I managed to get something out of the game by playing to my strengths, which was fighting, battleships and cruisers at range. Now, to answer some of the points that I saw were raised in Mr Gibbins' chat during the game, I'm not working my stats. I'm trying to earn some XP towards getting the Khabarovsk before it gets turned into a coal ship at the end of December. I could care less about stats. Yes, Valeto. They are rubbish. The only reason Mr Gibbons is playing it is because he's working his way through his ships, getting all the snowflakes. He's got a poor win rate on it. He doesn't enjoy it. He said so in the past. What's new? Well, unspeakable username. Unfortunately, I think it was just because people weren't shooting at it, quite frankly, when it was visible. No, Logan, I'm not blaming radar. If it was just radar, I'd have a go. If it was just the DDs, I'd have a go. But when you have a division of DDs with a rapid-fire cruiser hiding behind them and also a radar cruiser hiding behind them, no, I won't do that, just to enable Mr Gibbons to fire an extra salvo on his ship. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, B-Force. I was playing against the very nature of my ship for the first part of the game, staying in close support to the other DD, on the very edge of my concealment. I couldn't have played any more for the team up until that point if I tried. And finally, some unwanted and unasked for advice for Mr G. Number 1, use AP on broadsides. Number 2, use RPF for the team, not just for yourself. It'd be very handy, as a DD who hasn't got RPF at this point, to know where their DD locations were. That would have helped me greatly. Number 3, don't just sit behind islands using those gimmicky planes. Come out and support your team. You've got an icebreaker on the front of the ship. You've got 10km concealment, almost as our level. Take advantage of it instead of farming. Number 4, if you're not sure what a ship's doing, ask them. Use the inbuilt quick commands. Call for support. Tell them that you're going to support them on the right hand side of the map. Let them know what's going on in your head, if you can. And finally, a little bit of advice for your sanity. If you don't like playing a game, stop playing it. Looking back on the game, I'm quite happy with how it went at the beginning. I don't think there's a lot more I could have done differently. Until I had to start kiting away on the far side of the map. I think at that point, things could have been done differently. But it's just one of those games. See you on the next one.